Okay, so now values are getting inserted into the table. So next what we'll do is, so we'll display this value onto the screen. So for doing that, we'll use the recycler view concept, and yeah, we'll see like how we can do it. So first of all, we need a like, so this is your main activity. So this is where you will add the content. So next here, what I'll do is I'll add a button. So on click of this button, it should move to the next page. So there you can see other details. So let me create a button over here. So I'll add a floating action button. If you go to this button here, you can see this floating action button. I'll just place it over here. Okay, so now you can add any of this picture over there. Also, what you can do is you can use the icons which are provided by default. So if you click on this, and here if you go to vector assets, so here you can see, so here you can change this clip art. So it will show the icons, the material icons which are there, and that you can use. Yeah, so these are some of the icons which are available. I'll just use now, since we are seeing the contacts, so yeah, I can use this icon. So just select this and click on this OK, and it's the name, and then just click on next. So it will be in this folder drawable, and just click on finish. So yeah, so now the button will be having that icon over here. So here you can see the icon. Right, so now let me just constrain it here. Okay, so now on click of this button, it should move to another activity. So now let's uh, do the other activities. So go to the project, and in here in the rest, go to the layout, and then here you can just okay. So instead of this, since we are writing some code over there, it would be better if you open a new activity here itself. Create an empty activity. I'll name it as show contacts. Okay, so now this show contacts has been added. So once it will sync, you can see it over here. Now if you go to the layout, you can see there is this. So in here, since we are just showing the data using recycler view, you go to the palette, and here you can see the recycler view. Just take it and drag it here. So give it an ID. Okay, so yeah, now will be using this recycler view in the show contacts. So I will create an object of this. and in here I'll just find that recycler view. Okay, so after this, one default thing that you have to do is, so you have to take this recycler view and you have to do something like set layout manager. So here it will take a layout. So now what I want is, so the context whatever is there should be displayed in this linear fashion. So I'll use a linear layout. So I just pass in this linear layout manager object, and it will take in the context as this. Yeah, so now this much is done. So now let's understand like how recycler view, how the data will be presented using this recycler view. Now what we want is, so in here in this recycler view, so we are uh, showing the data in terms of a card. So card is like, so first we don't have that card, so first we'll design a card. Now in order to design a card, what we can do is just go to the layout, and in here just click on new, and here you can see layout resource file. So I'll create a card design. Okay, so this will be, so okay, so in this layout, so we'll design the card. So card in the sense, so we are showing the name, email, phone in a card. So that single card will design over here, and that will be recycled every time whenever data is passed to that. So now let's see like how we can do the design. So since uh, card view is not will not be present over here, so what you need to do is, so if you go to the file, and in here you can go to the project structure. So here you can go to dependencies. So in the dependency, click on this add dependency. So it will be a library dependency. So in here you can search for card layout, the card view. So make sure you are connected to the internet, and then yeah, so you can get this card view over here. Just click on this and select OK, then apply. So it will add this dependency into your Gradle, and so we can use the card design. So once the project will be synced, you can just go to the Gradle script, and in here you can just see here card view will be added. Okay, so now once we have the card view, let's go to the code. Right, so this will be the thing. So now the entire thing is in a constraint view. So wait until this process Gradle chain gets completed. Okay, so now once the sync is completed, so now we are having this constraint layout over here, so we need not have this. So what I'll do is I will just, okay, you can just remove this and add a card view. Right, so we need a card view, and make sure that Android height is done as wrap content. Width will be match parent because it should be spread out to entire width, and card should be only this much, should not cover the entire screen. That's why we use wrap content. So next, inside this card, okay, so now you cannot see the card, so let's add some properties over here. So if you give a elevation, so it will basically add some shadows. So it will be, okay, so now let's give a corner radius. So you're having card corner radius, so I'll give it as 20 ESP. Okay, so now let's add some content over here. So inside this, what I'll do is I'll take a linear layout. So it could be match wrap content, and then inside this linear layout I'll add text view, so we can display the name. It will be wrap content. So since there are 3 fields, so I'll add those. And now in this I want to add a default text. Give it as name, and then for this I'll give it as phone. So now for time being we are giving it, so later this will be replaced by the actual data. So now this is email. Okay, so now here, because linear layout is oriented in a different manner, so I'll give the orientation to be vertical. So now you can see all the 3 things over there. We can also see the card, so let me give some. So if you give a margin over here, margin of 10. Okay, so now you can see the card over here. So now let's give some padding. Okay, so now you can see the card which is designed over here clearly. Okay, so now what will happen is, so on this name, phone and email, all the data which are present on the text view on the database will be placed here. So for each of the data, one card will be created. So now since this single card will be used many times, so it will be very efficient. So that's why we use the recycler view method. Okay, so now we are having this text. So one more thing we can do is, so just we can give it an ID so that we can refer. So I do it as name. Then it will be phone number, and it will be email. Okay, so now you are having these 3 fields. So now let's go back to the design. So what will happen is, so this card will be placed over here on the recycler view. So one by one all the items will be placed. Okay, so now the card view is done. Now once the card design is done, next we should work on the recycler view part. So for that we need to design 2 more classes. Okay, so before that, so if you go to the DB helper, so in here we have just written the function for inserting the value into the table, but we have not written anything for fetching the data from the table, right? So let us finish that part first. Okay, so now whenever you want to fetch the value from the table, so okay, so let me just type it. So I will give it as cursor. I'll tell like why this cursor is being used. So I will give it as fetch data. Okay, so now similar thing has to be done. So here we had created the instance of this object. So now we are getting the writable database. Over here you can do what you can do is, you can just, instead of the writable database, so you can do something like readable, since you are not you are not actually writing the data into the table. Now once you have got the object, so next we will write the query. So I make a string, give it as query. So the query will be selecting all the values. So we are having select star from our table, that is contacts table. Okay, so now this is a query and we need to execute this query. So use the DB object, and in here what you can do is, so in this case you are not doing execute SQL, because you need to, so this execute SQL will just will not return you any values. So we need some values so that we can fetch it on, we can show it on the activities. So we have to use something called as rock query. So now if you go to this rock query, so here you can see rock query will return you cursor. So cursor in the sense, so it's similar to a pointer. So now you can see this cursor. So now I'm pointing my cursor towards this runs, right? So similarly, this function, what it will do is, so it will return me a cursor to the values which are present on the table. For example, now now let us go to this inspector. Guess the table will not be displayed. Now, for example, yeah. So here the values will be something like this, and then the phone number will be there over here. Okay, so now second, similar things will be there, similar records will be there, right? So now what this query will do is, so when you do select a star from the context table, so these two values will be returned. I mean, these two values are present in the table, right? So what cursor will do is, cursor will basically point to the first value which is present over there. So now this arrow represents the cursor, so it's basically a pointer. So now using this cursor we can fetch the value whichever is there in here. So next, once we have got this value, we can move our cursor to the next data which is there. So similarly, if there are many data, so this cursor will be kept on moving. So that's why we will be using the cursor return type over here, and that's why we are using rock query. So now inside this we'll pass the query, and then I guess it will take selection argument, so it's not, we are not giving anything, right? So now, so this will return you a cursor. I'll give it as C. So now this cursor, I'll return it back. So I will use this fetch data in the show contacts. So whenever I click on that show contact button, I'll call this function which is in the developer. Okay, so now, yeah, so now this much is done. So now let's start working on the recycler view. I'll close this. Okay, so now I'm having this much, right? So now first of all, so now since we are having these three data, right? So these three data are present, so these things should be displayed. So now in order to handle the insertion of data into this and fetching the data from this, so we'll create a data model class over here. So data model class will be a Java class, so I'll just name it as data model. So it's just a Java class which will be having setter and getter function. So I have name, then there is phone number, and then there is email. So once you have declared these three things, now just right click, then go to generate. So in this you can see this getter and setter. So just select all these three. So you will get these many values. Now along with this, yeah, so these are the getter and setter. Basically these are used to get phone, set phone. All these things will be helpful while when you are setting and returning the values. This is done. Close this, and now what we'll do is, for recycler view we need something called as adapter class. We have to design that, so I will give it as my adapter. This is a new class which we'll create. So since it's an adapter class, so there is already a adapter class which is provided in the Android. So we have to give like adapter. So you can see this first one with the angular bracket vh. So click on that. So we'll get this class. Now here create a class called as my view holder. I will explain like why I have used this. So it will extend uh, view holder. So if you go here, you can just select this view holder, and yeah. So now if you click on this create constructor matching supply, so just click on that. So it will create a constructor with these values. Okay, so now why we are using this, because like we are creating. Okay, so now we are having the card design, right? So we are having this card design. So what does this my web holder does is, so it will keep the references of your design whichever you have. Like you are having this name, phone and email and this entire card. Like the thing is, like whenever you pass the data, so it should know like where you need to place all those things, right? So that's why you need a address. So address of these three fields. So in order to get those address, and I mean in order to keep record of those address, so we are using this my web folder. Okay, so now in this only I'll create the references to this name, phone and email. Now first of all, let me, okay, so since they were a text view, text view name, so instead of name I'll just give it as np and name, phone and email. So now this you have, so the reference you need to do. So how to get a reference? So it's just same thing. So since we do not have the access to our object directly over here, so we should use something like item view. You have to take the item view dot. So in this you can use find view by id, r dot id dot okay. So before doing this, so in the card view I think I have not, okay, so this id we need to use. So this id we had given in the card, right? So the same id we need to use it over here. So now first I'm fetching the name, so I take in the name. So similarly I need to take the phone number and then the email. Phone and then the email. Okay, so now this is done. So my web holder will just hold the references to the whatever design you are having over here, whatever things that you are having over here, all those references are kept in this. Okay, now this is done. So now let's move back to this my adapter. Okay, so now in here you can see click on this, and here you can just click on implement methods. So all these three methods you need to implement. Okay, so now let's go here, and here if you remember, so we had that angular bracket over here, right? So okay, so it should extend your adapter. So adapter will be having this something called as vh. So vh is nothing but the web holder which it will take. So vh is a class that extends web holder, so that will be used by the adapter. So now our adapter will use this web holder whichever we have created. So now in this angular bracket, so we need to pass my web holder. See, now since this my web holder is present in this class only, what I can do is, so I'll just take the class name, it is my adapter dot. So in this I want to access my web holder, so I'll just pass in that. Okay, so now this thing is fine. So now just go here and do implement methods. All the three methods will be selected, and so these three methods we have to implement now. This much is written over here. Now we'll come back to this adapter. So now let's move to the show contacts. So here, so in the DB helper we had created this method, right? So we had created this fetch data, so in order to get the data from the table. So now let's use it over here. Okay, so since show contacts, we are interacting with this database. So first we need to make the connection. So now let's, here what we can do is you can create the object of DB helper. I'll create it as db, new db, new db helper. So inside this I'll pass in the context as this. I want to use it over here. So now we are having this object. So take the db and use fetch data, right? So now fetch data is the thing which we had written over here. So it will return you a cursor. So I'll take the cursor object. Just control and alt. So now you got the control. See this cursor object. So now using this C object, you can move the data. So now you will get the pointer. So now again, if this is some data, right? So imagine this as the data. So now your cursor will be pointing to this, the first value which is present in the table, right? So now what we need to do is, so we need to iterate over all these values, right? So that's why you can use the for loop. So since we do not know the endpoint, so we can use a loop. We can use the while loop. So what you can do is, so in the cursor there is a function called as move to next, which will automatically increment or automatically point this cursor to the next value whenever it reaches the end of the line over here. So that's why use this move next. And what you can do is, you can just fetch the value from the table, right? So now it will point to this first data value. Okay, so now if you remember, we had the data model class over here. So it had these many data, right? So but here what one more thing we can do is, can generate a constructor which takes all these fields. So now you have got this constructor. So what it will do is, so now see, so now I'm getting the value from the database. From the table I'm getting these values. So these values I need to pass it to the recycler view, right? So now in order to do that, first of all, I cannot pass it individually. Like I cannot pass in first ID, name, phone and email separately, right? So I need to pass it as a one object. Now what our db data model class will help us to do is, so it will help us to uh, get an object of the type which is of the data model. Means here this data model will be having these three fields. So if we create one object of this data model, then we can access all these three field values, right? So that's why what I'll do is, I'll create a data model object, right? Now inside this data model, so since just now we have created this constructor, so this constructor will take these three values. So now these three values we need to pass. So how we are passing these values? We are passing it from the table, right? So since we are passing it from the table, so just use the cursor c dot get string. This will basically get the string value. So get string will take an integer type uh, integer type parameter. So that's nothing but it represents the column value. So in our table we had id, name, phone and email. So I need to fetch name, so I'll pass in 1. So name I got. Next I need to pass in phone number, so I'll use get string, then I'll pass 2. Similarly c dot get string, I'll pass in the third column. Okay, so now what I have done is, so I have created this object of the type dm, of the data model type. So now this dm object will be having all these three fields: name, phone and email for this, right? Now for this thing, one data model object is created, right? But since there are several other records which are also present in the database, in the table, so we need to append each of this value to some place, and then that data should be passed to the recycler view. Okay, I will just type it over here. So now we are having the recycler view. So now dm will be representing only one object, right? So now once this is done, so now the cursor will be moved to the next value, right? So again this same dm will be initialized, but what about this previous value? So that will be gone, right? So that's why before it will move to the next iteration, we need to assign this dm value to something else, right? So that's why what we'll do is, so here I'll create a data type called as array list. Okay, so since we cannot since in the array list we can easily append the data to the we can easily append the data, so that's why we are using array list. So inside this, so in the angular bracket it will take in the parameter. Now our type is of the data model type, right? So that's why I'm passing in data model. Okay, so I'll name it as my data. So this is my new array list, and I'll initialize this object with this. Okay, right. So now this much is done. So now I've just created this my data array list. So now we are having this dm, so I'll use the my data and then I'll use add. I'll pass in the data model object, right? So now what will happen is, for each iteration it will create a data model object for this first thing. It will append it to this my data. Then again the cursor will be moving to the next location, next values. So there again it will create this dm object, and again it will be appended to the my data. So my data will be having a list of all the values that are present in the table. So that's what I want to represent onto the recycler view, right? So now all this data are present in this array list, my data. Okay, so now once this is done, so we have fetched the value and we have placed it somewhere in the array list. Now I need to pass this array list to the myAdapter class. Okay, so now to pass the data to myAdapter class, yeah, come over here, and in this what we can do is, we're having this recycler view. So take the recycler view object and do set adapter. So inside this, okay, sorry, set adapter. So inside this it will take the adapter. So that's why you have created this adapter class. So I'll create an object of this my adapter. So it's a new object which I am creating. So it will be new my adapter. So my adapter, okay. So my adapter will basically take in the data. So I'll just pass my data. Okay, so okay, so here one more thing that you need to do is, so since we are passing the data from that side, we have to generate the constructor over here. Okay, so but the problem is, so this constructor will not take anything, right? So before doing this, since we are passing the data as an array list, so I'll need to create something which is of the type array list. Okay, so now I'll generate the constructor. Yeah, so now you can see the constructor has been generated with uh, data model as its type, the data which we'll pass. So if you go to show contacts in here, now my adapter, inside this you are passing the my data. So my data is the array list, right? So recycler view dot set adapter. I have created this adapter over here. So this thing I will pass. Okay, so now once, okay, so now, yeah, so now the data will be, so whenever you do recycler dot set adapter my adapter, recycler will be showed onto the screen, right? So but before that, so this thing is called, so in here my adapter it will go in this. Okay, so here data will be assigned to my data which I have created over here, right? So on this, the first function that, okay, after this it will run this first function, that is Oncreate Viewholder. Okay, so now let's see what does this do. So once we implement these three functions, so our recycler will be completed. Okay, so now let's write here. Okay, so in the Oncreate Viewholder, So here there are several steps. So first thing that you need to do is, so first of all, you need to create something called as create an object of layout inflator. Okay, so then it will be layout inflator dot, you can use the from, and in here you should pass it as parent dot get context. So what it will do is it will create a object which we can use to expand this view over here. Like, so now we are having this thing. So first of all we need to, so since we are creating multiple objects of, I mean multiple uh, cards from this, so we need to have something like this, we need to have something like this inflator, which will help us to create that thing, create multiple cards. So that's why I'm creating this using this sentence layout inflator dot from dot parent dot get context. So this will basically represent like where I want to expand, basically where I want to create this card. So that value I'm passing, and then I have to use this inflator object, and then I need to tell like what I want to expand, right? So that's why I'll pass it as inflator dot inflate. So inside this you can see there are several constructors. So I need to pass the, like I need to pass this, I guess. So it will take layout resource, I mean, so since we are expanding the card view, so we need to pass that. Along with that, yeah, along with that we need to pass in a view group. View group is root, so you can just pass in as parent. I mean, in this thing you can pass it as false. So now if I go here, okay, so in here I'll pass the layout r dot layout dot the layout which we created, that is card design. Then we had I guess attached to the, no, I had this, I have to pass the parent, like where I want to do this, and then the false. Variable view group, which is the root value, so that I'm passing just the parent, and then yeah. Now once this much is done, okay, so now this inflator, I'll go to layout inflator, so it will return you something which is of the type view, right? So I need to catch it over here, so I'll create a new view, that is v, right? So now your my onCreate function will return you a type which is of the my view holder, right? So basically that will pass it to the bind. That's why in here I need to return something which is of the type my view holder. So in order to do that, what I'll do is I'll return new object of the type my view holder. So inside this I'll pass in the view which I've created now. Okay, so now this statement will basically create a hollow layout for this, where I can just bind in the data. So bind in the data in the sense I can put the data over here. Once this is done, you have the last function to implement, that is on bind view holder. So as the name suggests, it will basically bind means it will tie the data with the design which we have. I mean, in the name it will store the name, in the phone and email it will store the respective values. Okay, so now it's a little tricky, so let's see how we can do it. So take in here what you can do is, so see the parameters, it will give you something which is of the type my view holder, and it will, my view holder is basically, if you imagine, it will be this only, name, phone and email, right? So it will give the references to that. Okay, so in here just take the holder object, and in that you have declared it as n. Okay, 1 second. So here, okay, so now I have declared it over here. Just cut it down, place it here. Okay, so now in the holder you can access this name. It will reference to that which is over there. So this means it is pointing to this name which is over here, right? So in that I need to populate with the data. So in here you can use something like set text, Okay, so now setting the text. So where you are getting the data from. So you're basically storing that value over here, right? My data. So this my data you are getting it from your actual fetching from the table. So you are fetching the value and then you are passing it over here. So it will go to this my adapter. So it will assign itself to this my data. So here what you can do is set the text, take your my data object, and in that you need the first row, right? So do get. So inside this you can see the position. So position dot I want the name. So directly type in the name. So this will basically set name on the card over here. Similar thing has to be done with other fields. So I'll take the name. So then you had the reference for the email. Then you had it for the phone number. From my data take email. And from my data take the phone number. Okay, so now you have put the data onto the card. Now the last function is get item count. So this is basically it will return how much count is how much elements are there. So take the my data and do my data dot size. Okay, so now this much is done. Yeah, so once just let's see how we have defined all this. Okay, so in the show contacts I want to show the data in the recycler view. So to do that we are using the adapter, so that's why I've created this adapter class. Now for getting the data easily, like I have used this getter setter methods in the data model, right? Okay, so now here I need to create this data. So I need to implement these three methods. So on create will be called first. So that's why, so in that it will basically create a layout for the card. And in this function will basically populate this card with actual values. And this will just return the size which can be referred there. And for getting the values from the table we are using this. Okay, so now let's run our app and see. One more thing is left. Now if you go to the main activity, I mean the here, so we had this button, but we have not added any listener onto that. So let's go to the main activity, and in here let's get that floating action button. Right, so now in here just find the floating button. Or floating action button. So now let's add a listener onto it. So floating action button. On click of this, so it should move to the show contacts activity. So in order to move, you can use the intents. So new intent. So in here, just pass from where to where. So I want to move from to this to show contacts dot class. So I want to move there. Then chart the activity by passing in this intent object. Okay, so now my adapter. Okay, so now let's run this. Okay, so this is the app which I have installed on the phone. Now if I click on this contacts, so here you can see the various data which we had previously entered in our table. So here it's I guess we have entered a blank detail over here. Now let me try to add new data. So these are the data which I have entered, and I will click on add. So here what you can do is you can give a toast message that is it's successfully added. And if I go here, and here you can see, so it has been inserted over here in the bottom. So if you want it in a reverse way, so you can change it in the query. Like there you can give like select star from contacts table, order by we had the ID, so order by ID in the descending order. So that thing you can do so that it will come on the top. So this was the recycler view.